When I heard that Arc Raiders was getting hurricanes, well, I'll admit I got some Battlefield 2042 flashbacks, and not in a good way. But I of course was curious to see what Embark would do with storm systems. Unfortunately though, Arc Raiders didn't really get what I would call fun or interesting storms. It got, well, whatever you want to call this. Zero visibility conditions, constant shield damage, and difficult movement. Now thankfully there's a lot more to this update, including 2 entirely new arc that you'll run into across the maps, but I'm noticing that this is actually one of the first updates from Embark where I'm starting to see the community express, well, a bit less enthusiasm for the new content. Let's talk about it. So the Shrouded Sky update launched this week, adding a new hurricane map condition, 2 new arc enemies, updates to the Dam Battlegrounds map, and a bunch of pretty big balance changes. However, the reaction to the update has been pretty darn mixed, which is a bit unusual for this game. I think it's fair to say that the honeymoon phase for Arc Raiders is over, and they've got a fan base that is used to getting some top-notch content, so they're not going to be excited for anything less than that. Still, this is a pretty solid update. It just seems like the problem that many people seem to have with it is that it's injecting, well, frustrating ways to play the game, or changing ways that they used to play and making them harder to do things, like craft certain items that they're used to getting. Now, the new hurricane map condition is essentially a persistent storm that reduces visibility to just a few dozen meters. The wind also kicks up debris, which continuously damages your shield, at least when you're outside, and it slows you down quite a bit when walking or sprinting. Recharging your shields outdoors also isn't really possible without like a blue level shield recharger. So if you get stuck in a firefight outdoors, getting your shields back just isn't happening unless you're totally prepared for it. But that's assuming that you can even find other players to shoot at. I've played quite a few matches with the hurricane map condition active, and I got into maybe 2 firefights, and those were ones that I started because I'm a rat bastard. So either I've been bumped down into more of a PvE lobby, or people are just less interested in fighting on this map because, well, it's really hard to fight other players on this map, and it seems to attract people mostly just trying to run quests. Now, the constant shield damage being done by the weather actually makes you much more visible, so if you're actually trying to hide from other players, it's best to just take your shields off or let them drain entirely. But even with that visual aid, I barely saw any other players. Now, it's entirely possible that I've just played way too many games that try and reduce visibility and add chaos to maps and modes, and I'm a little jaded on some of these weather conditions. The visual effects are certainly cool the first time you see them, and for people just trying to do quests in peace, this could actually help you for getting a little bit more quiet time while you play. But once you try and expand your goals with your gameplay, the weather conditions get annoying real fast. Then again, maybe that's a bit of a flaw in how I like to approach Arc Raiders. It is, after all, intended as a PvE game first, with PvP as more of a spice to throw on top. If you played a lot of Battlefield games over the years, you could think of these as sort of Arc's version of sandstorms. They're cool the first few times you see them. Ultimately, though, they just slow the match down to a crawl, give you poor visibility, making all firefights much more chaotic, and they suck the fun out of any medium or long range engagements. Reading through the community discussion, it seems like people are also pretty divided on the weather system, many echoing how I feel, others saying it adds a fun, new, interesting dynamic to the game. I will say though, the loot seems much more generous than I'm used to, and there's new Raider cache style loot boxes that you can find that drop some crazy good gear like weapons and blueprints, but ultimately this just feels like another sort of lightning strike situation where you're like, oh, that's kind of cool looking, and then you're over it pretty quickly. Now, as for the new arc enemies, I gotta admit, these were surprisingly fun. At first I was thinking, really? More quadcopters and more rolling spheres? How original, Embark. But they really have nailed down the AI for these systems, that they're just really fun to fight against. The Comet is a rolling arc that is essentially a deadline on wheels. When it triggers, you have a couple of seconds to dodge away from it before it just blasts you and itself into oblivion. The Firefly is a flying flamethrower, and it's a little less fun to fight since it's more annoying than it is outright dangerous, but when the arcs start to pile on, and if there's a Firefly mixed in there, it's not going to be fun to have in that group. but it is fairly straightforward to kill by shooting the fuel canisters on its underside. Now, when it comes to balance changes, this is where the community seems to be sort of the most split. The Stitcher, Kettle, and Venator all got pretty noticeable nerfs, which has inadvertently made the Toro more powerful. The bigger change, though, was to the crafting requirements for some explosive items. The Deadline, Trailblazer, Wolfpack, and Showstopper now require an additional component to craft and had their sale value reduced. The Wolfpack in particular now needs a Rocketeer driver just to craft. The community seems really split on this one since it takes 2 wolf packs to kill a Rocketeer, which only drops 1 driver. Some say it was too easy to craft and trivialized fighting the bigger arc. Others say that it makes fighting the bigger arc for newer players much more difficult. I'll say that at least from my observations, it appeared that most people only seemed to fight Rocketeers when they had wolf packs, so maybe this update will encourage more creative ways of fighting them. Obviously, you can kill them even with a pistol if you're really dedicated, but I think the wolf pack in general somewhat trivialize some of these larger arc fights. Now, if you got used to farming arcs with easy to make wolf packs, you could be pretty annoyed by this update as it's going to kind of screw up your game plan, but overall I think this will help the balance. Now, as for weapon balance, there is no question that the starting guns like the Stitcher and Kettle were crazy useful even at higher levels of play. They were easy to get, cheap to upgrade, and arguably better than some of the top tier guns. And weapon balance really is a tricky situation in this game, as you don't want low geared people to always lose firefights to high geared people even if they're better players, but you also want a good incentive to get better weapons and use some of the rarer stuff. So hopefully some of the nerfs to the starting guns help incentivize that economy a bit more once the dust settles. The final thing of note is a new controlled access zone on Dam Battlegrounds that requires 4 players to hit 4 buttons in sync to unlock one of the best loot rooms in the game. Seems like a pretty cool mini event that encourages some friendly co-op between squads since, well, you can't drop with a party of 4, so you're going to need to find somebody in a match. It shouldn't be too hard if you're in the more PvE friendly lobbies, but once again, the PvP focused players will probably miss out on a bunch of the cool co-op events. Now, generally speaking, I think the fact that we're seeing a lot more criticism around this update than we have in the past generally means that players want to see content that feels more new. The new AI are good, but there's no denying that they kind of fall in line with the similar types of AI that we've already seen, and fighting them on the same old maps that we've already sunk hundreds of hours into isn't necessarily the most new feeling experience. Embark does have a new map in the works, and I have no doubt that it's going to be awesome, but it's still a little ways out, so I get that players are getting a bit antsy. I'd imagine Embark is trying to ramp up some of their content quantity to meet the demands of their massive fan base, but it's hard with a game of this scale to make sure that you don't accidentally screw up things that people loved your game for. On the PvP side, I'm seeing continuous complaints that cheating at the top level is absolutely out of control. It's hard to verify the actual numbers of cheaters, but it's not a surprise. Any highly popular game with competitive PvP elements attracts tons of cheaters, and I think it's kind of sad that this mainly affects the PvP player base that's already being inadvertently punished by being placed in more aggressive lobbies, making it much harder for them to actually run quests. The real highlight of the update for me, aside from the new arc enemies, is just how much more generous the loot has been. If you're missing blueprints or need some quick guns, these new cache boxes are easy to find just by roaming around the map, and they are full of incredibly good stuff. Now, if I only had more slots so I could actually put all this loot somewhere, that would be great. All in all, I don't see myself actively queuing up for hurricane map conditions unless I really need them. I more or less just see it as a cool visual effect that generally reduces the quality of the gameplay. Luckily, Arc Raiders is already operating at a quality level that is so high that they can afford to have some annoying game modes. What do you guys think of this new Arc Raiders update? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to see a different dystopian future game, check out this crazy indie shooter called Silverfish. It's kind of like Stalker, but if everybody was like a furry type character, but you're also fighting animals. It's hard to explain. Just watch the video. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.